right after the beginner beekeeping lesson portion. So we'll go ahead and get started here. I'll share. Yeah, man. All right. So last call before winter, everyone. First question. Can everybody see the Are Your Bees Alive, Still Alive slide?
Yes.
Outstanding. So show of hands. If you're online, go ahead and raise your hand through Zoom around the room. If you're in the thing, if in at the Arboretum, if your bees are still alive. Yes, I've got some thumbs up going here. Yay. If your bees are not still alive, now is a great opportunity to think about some different management techniques for the next season and to start thinking about if you purchase bees from out of state, maybe this year you purchase bees from in-state. So we're going to talk about winter survival and how to get them set up for those folks that have bees still alive. Low varroa mite levels are super critical going into the winter. It was even more critical in August when the bees were raising their winter bees so that they could be healthy this time of year. But if you still have a high mite load, consider oxalic acid vapor or maybe Formic Pro patties. It's too late for Apigard. It's too cold outside. But if you have a strong colony population already, that's great. Just make sure the mite level's low going into the next few months. So strong colony populations mean if you have two small colonies, it's really better to take your losses in the winter and combine those now and reduce the space down to the smallest possible space possible. So I know I just said possible 3 times. It's been a long day. So if you have 2 boxes on right now, but the bees will only really fill up 1 box, go ahead the next dry day that's over 50 degrees and reduce that down to 1 box. Or if you have 3, reduce down to 2. And then you want to make sure that you have adequate honey stores. So a standard size colony that's in 2 deeps right now, they'll need about 70 pounds of honey to make it all the way through the winter. And you want that located above and around the cluster. I'll show you a picture of that in the middle or in the next slide. If you don't have that much food, you'll need to add emergency food on top. And if you're thinking, I have no idea how much honey's in there, if you go ahead and try and lift up the front of your beehive box, and if it seems pretty heavy, you're probably okay. I've got a couple of my colonies that I literally cannot lift up off the front right now, and I'm pretty strong, so I'm pretty sure those are going to be just fine. But if you don't, make sure that you have dry sugar, dry white sugar, by the way, fondant or winter patties. Don't use summer patties anymore until the spring because there's too much protein in them. So here's what the optimal frame arrangement should look like. You should have honey across the top. They should have moved the queen by backfilling those top frames with honey. They should have moved the queen down. You probably still have some brood, maybe some eggs this time of year. You want to have nectar and honey surrounding those. And those frames that you've got pollen on, go ahead and push those towards the capped brood, or they should have done that on their own. And then, so what do they look like on the outside? Here's some of my colonies and how they look on the outside. These are pictures that I took 2 different Februaries. So sometimes we have snow, sometimes we don't. But so there's really no need to wrap your colonies here so long as your boxes are in good shape. The bees are going to propolize all the edges and seal those up so they shouldn't get water in them. The water comes from condensation from the bees, much like living in a tent on a camping trip. The breath that they expire has water in it. It goes to the top and then it condensates and then drips back down on them. That's super bad. So we're going to talk about some ways to mitigate that. Lots of folks in the club I know are using some sort of moisture boards or shims. So here's what I do, take it or leave it. I have uh, no wrap, but I do a 1-inch rigid insulation inside my telescoping lids. And then I add a feeding shim right above, and I'll show you what that looks like in the middle, or in the next slide. You put the feeding shim right on top of your top box with frames. You add a moisture quilt or moisture boards on top of that. And make sure that you use some sort of weights or tie down straps on your colonies. We've got a good example of that this weekend, prequel to our winter storms coming up. It can get gusty and windy and pick those lids up. And in the middle of a rainstorm, when the lid gets picked up and tossed off, then the bees get all wet and they die. And then if you don't already have moisture or mouse guards or entrance reducers, depending on where you live, if you live out in the country, it's not a bad idea to put mouse guards on so that the mice don't live in your bottom box over the winter. I've had them do that in my out yards. So mouse guards where appropriate, and definitely entrance reducers if you have your boxes in town. So here's what that looks like on the inside. I've got a colony here with 2 deeps, and I use the mountain camp method of adding extra sugar. You can use fondant or candy if you want. I just find it easier to use a sheet of newspaper, make a bowl out of the newspaper, and pour dry sugar on top. The hardest part these days is trying to find newspaper, but any paper will work. A double sheet of newspaper is nice because you can make a nice bowl in it. And then once the bees eat through the newspaper, the sugar has absorbed enough water that it doesn't filter down through your colony and end up on the bottom screen. But some of it does eventually, but if you don't have a bowl. White sugar, definitely, again, I can't stress that enough. Don't get fancy and get raw sugar. It's not good for the bees. It has too much fiber in it, and it can give them dysentery. Fondant, oftentimes nurseries or bakeries have extra. You can make a deal with them and get extra, or get some winter patties. And if you have friends in the bee club, you guys can pitch in and get a 10-pack of winter patties for pretty cheap. And then you add on top of that feeding shim, some sort of moisture quilt or box. This is what I use. It's just a small shim. I use rabbit shavings, but you could use wool or any other absorbent material if you want. Some people put that in pillowcases too. I just use aluminum window screen. And then I always use my insulated lids. I leave them on year round. All right. And so with that, I'll open it up for questions for a few minutes if anybody has questions about winterizing their colonies. Magali.
We actually have a good question from online that I answered online, but for the people in the room, the question was, how do you go about consolidating different colonies of bees if you decide to cut your losses?
Yeah, if you do decide to cut your losses, that is a great example. Magali, do you want to answer the question? So we have 100% consistency. I think we probably do, but if you want to go ahead and answer, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, you never know. But usually what I do is I put newspaper or some kind of paper on top of the box of the bees that I want to keep. And then on top of that, I put the other colony that I want to combine them with. If you have time to pinch your queen that you don't want, you can do that. If you don't have time, the fact of putting the colony that you don't want to keep the queen of on top, because hot air rises, that means the scent of the queen below goes up. So you have a higher likelihood that the queen that survives is the one from below. And by the time they will have eaten through the paper, they will have gotten habituated to each other and to the scent, and they won't fight. And so that's how I combine the colonies. Do you have any other technique?
That's exactly what I do. Although I would add, Magali lives in a drier climate than we do. So what I do when I combine in the fall like this is I'll go back after a week or so and I'll take that paper out, because the paper that's on the outside wicks the water inside. So I just go ahead and scrape that paper out after a week. Great question. Anybody else?
Kevin, no one in the room. I have a question that I'm not sure how to answer because it's been a while. What kind of pollen are the bees still finding in Seattle? I was guessing ivy, but I haven't lived in Seattle long enough to now know for sure that it could be ivy. Apparently it's yellow-orange-ish, so I don't know if you have a vote.
We actually still have some dandelions going at my place. So they're bringing in some dandelion. I'm not sure what other pollen they're getting. They should have a whole, at least one face of pollen. A couple weeks ago, the pollen was coming in hot and heavy. So right now it's pretty much slowed down, but definitely ivy. And ivy honey too. And they usually won't eat the ivy honey over the winter. So it's that bright white honey that smells like cat pee that crystallizes right away. So it gets so cold in the winter that, and they can't go out to get water. So they'll get it off the sides of the colony, but there's usually not a water source for them to rehydrate that. So it's a good idea to make sure that if you only have ivy honey in the, that you also add extra sugar on top. And then they can eat it in the they can eat it in the spring as soon as it warms up. Jeff, I'll ask you, what do you do about top bar hives that are small this time of year?
Can you hear me? I'm off mute now,
Yep.
I think. Okay.
Yeah, we can.
It's harder to make up the difference. Like with Langstroth, you can just mountain camp. With top bar, if you have empty comb and not much honey, you can actually pour, set the cells slightly lean up. So you can, what I've done, I haven't done this in ages, but what I've done in the past is you can get like a towel or a paper or something, and you can lay the comb on its side and you can just pour dry sugar into it and then get like a water mister, mist the outside so it sets. And then if you can usually very gently flip the frame around and do the same on the other side, and then you can insert that right next to the cluster, or wherever they don't have honey. Yeah, so they have to be able to reach it if they're small. Yeah, top bars, when they're small, they can't move. Each comb is a wall basically, so it's really hard for them to move. So when you add honey, you do have to get it right to where they're clustering.
Right next to
But
them.
don't split the cluster. That would be bad.
Yeah. I do that in the winter too. I'll go in like December and January on a cold, dry day, and I'll peek in. And if the cluster is closer to the top and the food is away from them, usually they'll move to where the food is. But if the cluster's away from the food, I'll push it over to the edge of the bees.
Yeah. I think what a lot of people forget is the bees actually go into the empty cells to generate heat. And if you don't leave them any empty cells, they'll die, even though they're just walls of honey. You can't get thermal heat through the wall of honey like that. They
Right.
have to have the empty cells.
Mine are usually on top by February. And so I'll just push the dry sugar closer in, the clumps of it closer in where the bees are, so that they
Yeah.
starve.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing I was going to mention, there's still asters out there blooming, which is an orange pollen. The rain kind of did most of mine in, but they were blooming last week.
Regina online just wrote that the calendula is still blooming too. Peter, any questions from the room?
We had one person, who just wanted to mention earlier that it's a good idea when you're doing the combines to cut a couple slits in the newspaper just to give them a little starter spot. Otherwise, occasionally they won't actually chew through it.
Yeah, that's
And they'll
true.
just stay in two different units.
especially when it's cold.
Yeah. Any other real questions? I know I threw this one out before. Deep winter, Tracy, can we talk about deep winter? Because we're not going to be, don't have another
Sure.
meeting.
So deep winter is really all about making sure that they have food. There's not much else you can do. People often worry about getting into their colonies in the winter. And I read from a very wise master beekeeper one time on her blog, Rusty Burlew's honeybee suite, that don't worry about opening them up in the winter. Cold bees don't die, but cold, wet bees do. And they certainly do if they starve to death. So it's important to make sure that you keep a constant supply of food on top. And if you're a techie and like technical sorts of gadgets, there are cameras now that you can buy that connect to the bottom of your phone, and you can look inside and look at the heat signature. And you can use those little, there's little probe lights that will connect to your phone that you can use actually at auto parts stores. You can stick that up in your colony and look without having to open them up to see if your bees are alive. It's kind of fun to do. But basically, it's about keeping them dry and keeping them fed. So I look once a month. I'll look in December, I'll look in January, and then things kind of start changing in February. But I definitely look once a month to make sure that they still have food and that they're dry. So if the chips get wet, I just take the chips out. One of the reasons why I use rabbit shavings is because I'll open that top up. I'll see if the chips are wet. If they are, I'll just scoop them out, throw them on the ground, and then I'll put dried chips in. And then I literally just lift that up and peek inside to see how much food they have. And if they need more, then I just stick a paper plate with more sugar in there for them. I don't know. What else do you guys do, Peter?
Pretty much what you do. Check them once a month, make sure they've got food, and make sure they're still dry. Well, there's usually if they're wet, that's
Yeah.
just got
Oh, the other
too
thing I
wet.
do is I'll pull my entrance reducer out and I'll use my hive tool and I'll scoop out the carpet of dead bees on the bottom, and then I'll shove it back in so that they can get out through the bottom entrance. And you want to have your upper entrance so that it looks like a U in the winter, so that the dead bees don't cover it up, but sometimes they do. So once a month when I check, I pull those out and I use my hive tool and scoop those dead bees out so that the other bees can go out if they want that way. But usually they use the upper entrance on mine. But if you don't have upper entrances, you definitely need to make sure that bottom entrance stays open. Even when there's snow, they'll go out to go to the bathroom on a dry day.
Molly's got her computer hand up. I don't know if that's intentional or if it's just still up.
Moggle, your hand's still up.
Well, I actually had, there was a quick
Again.
question from Darius, and Darius, you might want to unmute yourself to ask exactly kind of how, whether you want national statistics versus local statistics. But for the whole group, is Denny Nahira still doing his survey of our survival rate kind of regionally, or
Oh, I don't know if he's still doing that.
I might need to look it up. But Darius, did you want to know local statistics or did you want national statistics?
Personally. So I think that the regionally it's in the past has been very similar, that we've lost about 60% of colonies as a whole. I think that's about what it was last year. Personally, I lose some in the fall because I capture a lot of swarms, and if the queens and the colonies can't live off of the minimal mite treatments that I give them, I don't care if they died. Rather they died than try to baby bees that don't have any varroa hygienic properties. But pretty much most of mine, so about 80% of mine that are alive now will make it through till the spring. I, like everyone, has made mistakes in the spring, and a couple of mine have starved over the years. So it's really starvation. If they make it through now, it's really starvation, and the dry, keeping them dry, that will make the difference. I don't know, what does everybody else experience? I know, Jeff, you've got pretty good survival too. Anybody else? Nobody wants to. Nobody wants to share.
So we do have another question for him.
Question about the end of winter, when would the, if you had pollen to your bees in the early spring, tail into winter, when would that be? Is that a January or a February?
I do it right around Valentine's Day. So as soon as it's warm enough slash dry enough for me to get out there, it's usually Valentine's Day week or the next week that I can get out there and literally open it up a crack and shove a pollen patty in there and close the box again. If you do that early, though, you got to be really careful because they will start brooding up and use a lot of food. So unless you're going to check then every week, then you should probably wait a little bit longer, like into March to do that. But if you add pollen patties early like that, then there's been research that shows that your colonies are about twice as big as they would have been otherwise, by the time the blackberries bloom. So there are advantages to doing that. The disadvantage is that you've really got to pay attention at that point and make sure they don't run out of food. Okay, with that, I'm afraid I have to go. I double booked myself tonight. I have to go teach another class. And so I'm going to have to sign off and say good luck this winter. Looking forward to seeing everybody at the January meeting.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, hi, everyone. Happy October 28th, almost Halloween, almost the end of the year, pretty much the end of the year. I'll do some really fast announcements and then we'll break for like 5-10 minutes and have our main speaker for the night. Really fast announcements. There's not much to do here. Please. Sharing that screen. Okay, did everyone see that?
Yep.
Oh, you can't see it. Oh, I hate this. One moment, mild technical difficulties. That'll work. Okay, so it is sort of working. People in the room, sorry, this is gonna be slightly odd. Happy October, I already said that. Our main, obviously, this is PSBA. Welcome. If you've never been here before, it's great to have you here. I am president. My name is Peter Nolte. If you are in the room or not in the room, if you are an officer or a trustee, please just raise your hand, wave. If you're online, raise your virtual hand so that everyone can see who you are. We do have coming up the big piece of the announcements today is November is our annual meeting and potluck. That's when we do elections. That's when, if you want to, you become a part of the board. You could be an officer, you could be a trustee. The biggest thing for me to point out is that the annual meeting and potluck is on November 18th. It is the third Tuesday of the month, not the fourth Tuesday, because the fourth Tuesday would be, basically Thanksgiving. So everyone, don't show up on the fourth Tuesday next month, November 18th, 6:30. I would love to see you all here in person. It is a potluck. PSBA will provide some food. So it's totally fine. If you can't bring anything, that's fine. Come, enjoy. We'll have some food here provided by PSBA. We will have some food here provided by all of the rest of us. 6:30 to 7:30 is the potluck, 7:30 to 8:30, give or take. Elections, annual meeting. Bruce, our treasurer, will do a fast financial update. I believe we all agreed that that was happening at the last board meeting that he wasn't at, but let's see, and yes, on the subject of elections, we do need ideally 2 officers. We're looking for a new secretary and a new treasurer. If you have any interest in either of those positions, I would love it if you would talk to me or any of the other officers or trustees. My email is really easy. It's president@pugetsoundbees.org. If you have any interest in one of those 2 officer positions, please shoot me an email. We are also looking for a total of 4 new trustees going into this next year. Each trustee is elected for a 2-year term. Officers are elected for a 1-year term. We are looking for 4 new trustees going into next year. If you have any interest in officer or trustee, please let myself or one of the other officers or trustees know. Other than that, one other thing, just fun piece. If you are here in person next month, November 18th, PSBA has been donated at least several beehives that people just said, we want to give these away to other people who will use them. So that's just going to be a drawing for anyone who comes in person to the November annual meeting in potluck. We're going to be giving away at least 3 beehives. It might be more than that. I don't remember.
Here, Paul.
What was that, George?
15? Paul.
With frames? With bees. Sorry, no bees. I'm sorry. I can't, bees would fly around. It's too warm in here. But yeah, no. Dead hives, no bees. That is our main announcements. Equipment. There will be some other things we're giving away at the November annual meeting and potluck, as well as the free beehives. Come, have fun, eat, learn a little bit more about how PSBA runs, and help choose your leadership for next year. Finally, if you have a question statement addition to all of that. Oh,
We do have an excellent question from online, which is, what is it that trustees do?
So trustees are basically who runs the organization. The officers in PSBA, the officers don't actually have that much more power than the trustees. We have some specific jobs that we do, but we don't have any more power, with a couple of very, very small exceptions. We don't have any more power than the trustees. So we have a 15-person board, 5 officers and 10 trustees, and the trustees run the organization completely. So if you want to be a part of running the organization, I have 1/15 say in all of the decisions we make. That's the easy step up, is into the trustees, and then maybe be an officer. Thank you, Nancy. Nancy has a great addition of how often do we meet? The board decides that at the beginning of the year. We are required to meet, if I remember correctly from the bylaws, twice a year. We do usually meet more than that, at least quarterly, and sometimes we do meet. This year we started out monthly because I was starting as president for the first time, and I needed a little help ramping up and I really appreciated everyone putting in the extra time. But quarterly, bi-monthly, it's what the board agrees to. And
This year it was mostly about every other month, wasn't it?
we probably averaged every other month this year. That was a little heavier at the beginning and then a little slower.
There's no meeting, right?
And there's, thank you. Everyone's being very helpful. And George added that they are Zoom meetings. Everything is. Did you say how many members do we have currently?
Yeah, well, we have 54, so 25 people altogether.
I don't.
I mean, yes, the other. Three people, how many actual?
Bruce, do you know?
Yeah, I do know offhand, about the round, been around 300.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Lots of them obviously don't come to meetings.
Yeah,
But
yeah, and it's something like that, it's been, sometimes significantly less. One of the things that runs it up is that, everyone who signs up for one of our beginning beekeeping classes automatically becomes a member.
Oh,
And so, that's usually like 60 or so people. But a lot of folks, are, continue for a few years and after taking a class, for example, we don't see them very often. And then they got out.
can you automatic, or you know, if you got your credit card or something?
That's an issue sometimes, yeah, and sometimes people are surprised that they let me know if they don't want you to use it. But sometimes some of that goes wrong, yeah.
Interesting.
Peter, I have another question.
Nancy has another question. Yes, so Nancy wanted to specify, and these are largely board members or just asking questions then, thanks for me, thank you all. Board member or board meetings usually are in the 1 to 2 hour range, they're in the evenings. Again, the board agrees at the beginning of the year when the meetings will be at a time that will be and dates that will be convenient for everyone. They are Zoom meetings. At this point, I certainly would like to do like 1 or maybe 2 in-person board meetings next year for those who are able to do it. It would be a hybrid meeting, so anyone who didn't want to or couldn't come in person certainly will have to. But I think it would be good team building to have 1 or 2 in-person meetings, board meetings. Personally, and the board would get to decide whether or not they want to do that, because it's the board. Regina, did you have a question?
No, this is more of an announcement. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The Bitter Lake Pea Patch is looking for someone to manage their hives. I don't know how many they have, but I think it's 2 to 3. So if anyone's interested, I can give you contact information. I can put my email and phone number in the chat.
Thank you, Regina. Okay, that I think was pretty much all of my announcements. Let's take a fast, like 5-minute break. People who are in person, grab some snacks, tea, whatever you want. People who are online, feel free to chat. Meet back here in 5 minutes. I'll do a really fast introduction of Bree, and then we will learn all about native bees for pollinators. Thank you.
Sorry, what is the talk, John?
The talk tonight is on Wallop Research and Extensions. She designs and facilitates workshops, writes blogs, and newsletter updates about Wazoo bee research activities, writes educational fact sheets, and more. She also facilitates new Master Beekeeper certification that she designed alongside the Washington State Beekeepers Association. This seminar will overview pollinator diversity, explain ways you can help protect pollinators, and teach you how to effectively manage solitary bee hotels. You will also gain knowledge of programs in the Pacific Northwest that give people opportunities to survey and identify bees through citizen science projects and informal observations. A native bee speaker was one of the specific requests that we had at the picnic in July. So I am absolutely thrilled that Bree was able to do this talk for us. Bree, it's all yours.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you everyone for inviting me. I normally would come in person, but I'm a part-time student as well, so I had class earlier and couldn't come in person. But I'm glad that this is such a fruitful hybrid meeting. There's a lot of people online. So today I'm talking about native pollinators. Here's my email. It'll be on the last slide as well. So you're welcome to email me any questions or just generally use me as a good resource for any bee or pollinator related questions. And I'm going to go ahead and get started now. Thanks for the nice introduction. A little bit more about me. I went to Oregon State University for my undergraduate and graduate degrees, and my background is mainly in entomology. I've worked with a lot of different natural controls for an invasive fruit fly, which is pictured here on the far right, spotted winged Drosophila. And I've also done some museum insect curation, of course, beekeeping, and working with some other non-apis bees like mason bees. So now I'm the extension coordinator and able to take a lot of that entomological background and do some really cool outreach with folks. So of course, a lot of people think of bees when we mention pollinators or maybe butterflies as well. But there's a lot of different diversity within the word pollinator, such as beetles, hummingbirds, bats, and even flies. So I like this graphic because it has some of those included. In Washington, here's a really good representation based on data that was published on rural and urban ecosystems around the Puget Sound area in Washington. This was a survey done in 2015 and 2016, and they were basically looking at the interactions between certain plants and what was landing on these plants to pollinate them. And so the big chunks on top are bees and non-bees, and the thickness of that bar is abundance. So if it's a thicker bar, there was more observations. To the thinner bar, there was fewer observations. And you can see that they grouped it into bees and non-bees. There were, out of those 2,000 observations that were recorded, 61% of those interactions with plants were bees, but the other percent was non-bees. And actually flies were the second highest visitation, with 35% of the visiting pollinators being flies. And you can see these connections here going through this kind of webbing structure. They connect to what they were observed interacting on. So like here, this big thick chunk in the middle is wild mustard, and they saw bees and non-bees interacting with them. But then if you go to the sides, the polar ends of these webs, you can see that there's 100% non-bees interacting with pea, or 100% bees interacting with poppies. So you can kind of see some variation as well in what is pollinating what. So I thought this was a good representation of what's going on in our own backyard in Washington. So when I'm mentioning flies, maybe some of you picture house flies, or maybe you've seen these flies up here that kind of mimic bees in your backyard. So I like to include this slide in a lot of my talks because it gives you kind of a idea of what to look for when you're in your own garden space, and you can maybe try to challenge yourself to, oh, is that a bee or is that a fly? So some traits that are more evident of being a bee or fly are really the eyes, the shape of the eyes. Flies usually have more round, large eyes that usually connect on the top of their head, kind of like what drone bees look like, male honeybees. Usually they're very bulbous like that, where a lot of the foraging bees that you see out are going to be females, and those have more long, oval, more on the side of their face shaped eyes. Another not always consistent takeaway is body shape, but usually there's the general pattern that flies usually have a more stout body, a less obvious waist, as they say, where there's a separation between these two body segments, the thorax and abdomen, where bees usually have more of an hourglass shape. And then wings is another thing you can use, though this is a little bit hard because wings are often moving super fast as these critters are flying, or if they're landed on a flower, bees often have their wings kind of more at a resting position, so it's kind of hard to tell. But in general, flies have one pair of wings. They're in the order Diptera, which means two wing, where bees are in the family Hymenoptera, order Hymenoptera, which means married wing. So they have two pairs of wings that are connected with this little hook called hamuli, and so they have another pair of wings that flies do not. So I already started pointing to this picture here in the top left. I was going to quiz you, bee or fly, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself and telling you the answer. But this column here are both flies and these are both bees. This one is another interesting fly that mimics bees, but they mimic more bumblebees. They're very furry. These are in the family Bombylidae. So that's just another cool fly that I like to introduce to people in these talks. How many of you seen these pollinating flies in your garden space? Yeah, cool. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. They like drinking nectar and they're really good pollinators. So it's fun to see what else is in your garden besides just bees. Oops. So bees are considered the most efficient pollinators. They think they get a lot of attention when people mention pollinators because of this. And there's several reasons, and we have a good chart that I kind of already clicked through that I'll show you again in a second, but their food is almost completely provided by flowers, whether it's pollen or nectar. And they have a very specific purpose of foraging for those when they're out and about, where some of these other organisms that are considered pollinators, such as beetles, might be more passively pollinating, even though they're still considered pollinators. So bees are the most efficient because they have these specialized structures. They're very hairy, they are very variable in size, so they can fit into certain flowers that maybe other organisms can't. They also have special hairs or structures on their body. Many bees, like honeybees, have corbicula, where they have a kind of little spot on their back of their hind leg that pollen can be packed into. Other bees have scopa, which are a very large group of hairs, and I have a picture of it in the next slide. Also, for brevity, I'm not going to go through each of these specifically, but another cool one I wanted to point out was behavior. Some bees buzz pollinate. Has anyone heard of buzz pollination? Or maybe haven't heard? So buzz pollination is a special thing that bumblebees are known to do, where they can vibrate their body at a certain frequency and dislodge pollen from a flower that way, where maybe their body can't fit into the flower itself, so they latch on with their legs and vibrate, and that pollen can fall onto their body. So here is kind of more of a like the red or orangish highlight is the body part that I'm talking about when I'm mentioning corbicula or scopal hairs. Like I said, the corbicula is on that hind leg, so it's kind of an indentation. Bumblebees and honeybees both have them, and that pollen can group together, and that's what you would often see as your pollen basket. And then scopal hairs are either on the underside of the abdomen, or some bees have really, really hairy back hind legs. And so these hairs are extra good at collecting a lot of pollen. Also, bees are just very diverse in general. They vary greatly in size, appearance, behavior, effectiveness as pollinators because of those differences in behavior or size, especially to certain flowers. They vary in what kind of flowers they like to pollinate or collect from, and their nesting styles are different. So I like this picture because it's a nice representation of the vast diversity that's going on in the world of bees. You have a giant bumblebee here that looks humongous in comparison to these other smaller bees. You also have these very green metallic bees. These are sweat bees. I'm sure maybe some of you have seen these in your garden spaces as well. And then you have other bees that have very large mandibles. Carpenter bees are known to have very large mandibles, and those bees can chew through wood and make their nests that way. So a lot of the bees, of course, that we're familiar with, honeybees, of course, are social bees. They have this colony, they have this hierarchy within their system, but 80 to 90% of bees are actually solitary, which means they don't live in a colony like honeybees. The females are foraging for their own offspring. They lay an egg on a pollen provision, and then they leave it. There isn't this cooperative brood care that we see with nurse bees in a honeybee colony. And of the 80 to 90% of bees that are solitary, only about 30% or so are cavity nesting. So 70% of them are ground nesting. And so this is very interesting because a lot of the time you might be around a ground nesting bee nest and not even know it. They kind of look like ant hills a little bit. Except, oh, Regina, can you mute your Zoom? Sorry. There's obviously no ants coming out of that hole in the ground, but I have some cool pictures of it here coming up. So there's different nesting needs, of course, between cavity or ground nesting bees. So cavity nesters, of course, are honeybees. Bumblebees occupy large cavities. They like to find places in shallow ground that are maybe abandoned rodent nests. So technically, that's not a ground nesting habit, even though you might see bumblebees in areas in the ground. Those are because there's cavities left behind for those bees. For smaller cavity nesting bees, stems that are hollow or dead tree trunks, for example, those are where those bees would be attracted to laying their eggs and provisioning for their offspring. For the soil and ground nesting bees, they vary quite a bit in soil preference. So some might like denser soils or more clay-based, and some like maybe more loose or sandy soil. So it just depends on the species. So one thing that I like to mention is supporting ground nesting bees is a challenge because they're underground. They're not very obvious, but you can provide patches of undisturbed soil in your garden or apiary spaces where you absolutely don't till, you don't do any disturbance, and that will let them have a nice space to develop. A lot of these solitary bees, whether they're cavity or ground nesting bees, they only have one generation per year. So it's very different from honeybees, where we see that continuous brood production. So leaving an area in your soil that's undisturbed will let a generation of bees fully develop for the next season. So here is a researcher on the end of a cranberry bog, I believe, and she's pointing to a ground nesting bee hole. So you can see how cryptic they are. Here's another one up close. So they vary quite a bit in tunnel structure. So they, a lot of the time, they're modeled kind of like this, where it's just like a tunnel, and then they have, maybe one cavity on each side. But according to this publication that was done quite a long time ago, they vary quite a bit by species. I don't know how they figured this out, but I like to include this diagram to show you that even within the ground nesting bees groups, there's a lot of diversity there. So like I mentioned, many solitary bees have one generation per year. Mason bees, for example, are active as adults only in the spring. So you might see mason bees around March through May, and they're done flying as adults by May, and then they're inside their nest developing the entire time until the next year. And I have more about mason bees specifically, but in general, this is a ground nesting bee that was depicted in different parts of their life cycle. So you have, after the adults are done being active, you can pretend here that you can see an egg on this pollen ball that now hatches into a larva, begins to go through the different instars of larva to develop bigger, and then becomes a pupa and will finish its development into an adult later the next year. This is very different from social bees, which are likely active for longer periods. So you can see here that this is just like a bunch of arches that might depict different species of bees. Not all bees are only active during March through May, like I gave an example of mason bees, but other bees might be active more in the summer only or in the fall months. But you see this yellow line here is bumblebees, so they might be active for longer seasons, like through the early spring to early fall. Another survey that was done by someone in our lab in 2017, this is again in rural and urban ecosystems in Western Washington. This was a survey that was just looking at which bees are in Washington. And according to their research, they were finding that bumblebees and honeybees are, of course, the most common, as well as sweat bees, which are those metallic, usually most obviously those metallic bees, although not all sweat bees are metallic like that. So this pie chart, the biggest sections are, of course, honeybees, bumblebees, and then 3 different genuses of sweat bees. And this might be, they might be called most common. It also could be because there's such higher populations, like bumblebees and honeybees are social, so they're more often caught when you're doing these types of surveys. But this was just a nice representation to show you here. Another interesting paper that came out that's linked here below if you have any interest in reading about museum specimens and what preserved specimens can tell you about occurrences in certain areas of a state. But this is a map that is, each dot is sorted by family. So Andrenidae, Apidae, these are just different bee families. And you can kind of see the distribution here. The Puget Sound is very well sampled. Many of the specimens that were in that museum are depicted here, but this is without honeybees and bumblebees. So when we say they're the most common, I'm going to advance to the same picture, only showing bumblebees and honeybees, and you can see how many more are found. So the yellow is honeybees, and then the blue is just any species of bumblebee that was found. So I'm going to get a little bit more into things that you can do to help pollinators. I like to simplify it into about 3 steps. Of course, reducing pesticide exposure is something that I think a lot of us are already aware of, especially as beekeepers. Providing nesting habitat. So like I mentioned, supporting those brown nesting bees. If you have areas that you don't till at all and you just leave undisturbed, you'll be able to provide nesting habitat. Also leaving areas more natural. There's a big campaign right now from the Xerces Society called Leave the Leaves, because we're getting into fall here. But I do recommend maybe raking your leaves out if you care about your grass, maybe raking your leaves into the rocks or something. So you can still support these important ecosystem communities, but you can maybe save your grass in your yard. If you remove snags or fallen branches, you're removing possible habitat for some of those cavity nesting bees. So again, just kind of leaving that debris or something that might be unsightly to you might be really helpful to these pollinator communities. Also providing floral resources, of course. So we have slides for each of these, and I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail about these. And feel free to interrupt me at any time to ask questions. So with pesticide exposure, so this graphic is more applicable to people who are pesticide applicators. You can see that this is a pesticide. It's a truck applying pesticides with a spray. But I think it's a nice graphic to show you the different ways that pollinators can be exposed to pesticides. So of course, direct exposure, if there's residues on flowers, they have these direct contact with those pesticides. But also outside of the flowers, it could be through leaves, consuming the pollen or nectar that's on those contaminated flowers. And this is also something that is impacted. You can see the red and blue dots here. If you're using a systemic pesticide like neonicotinoids, those are going through all of the tissues in a plant and coming through that pollen and nectar. So even if you're not actively spraying on the flower, it's coming through the system within the flower. So that is a way of exposure. Also, drift, of course, if there's any kind of wind or puddles nearby, these pollinators can be impacted by non-target mist from these pesticides or drinking from that contaminated water. And also if there's some contaminated water or drift onto even just the ground and not pollinator nests or hives themselves, there's a lot of pollinators that collect dirt and like especially for mason bees, they collect mud. So having any contaminated nesting material can also impact future generations of pollinators. So a lot of the time when we think of pesticide toxicity, you have acute toxicity or chronic toxicity. And acute toxicity is that very lethal, like one big exposure is really deadly. This is often what you would think about with like pesticide kills for honeybee colonies. So you can see a lot of honeybees dead outside of the hive. As just a side note, we get a lot of questions at our bee program about feeling like someone's hives died from pesticide exposure. If you feel like that's the case, there's routes that you can go through to report that. But one big thing to observe if you're really wondering if it's a pesticide kill or not is if all the bees that died are around the same age and it happens suddenly. There also might be a lot of dead bees outside of your colony that have accumulated over like a week or so, and that would be maybe more evident of something else happening in your hive. So that was just a kind of a side note there. The other types of toxicity is chronic toxicity, where you could think of like it's a lot of little nicks, like lot of paper cuts that kind of accumulate to having these lingering effects, like impaired foraging or being more susceptible to disease. And so a lot of the direct and indirect exposures that happen kind of more often lead to this chronic toxicity. So one big way that we can control this risk to pollinators is choosing how to following the label and choosing to use these pesticides responsibly. Understanding how to read labels is a skill because some labels aren't super clear. So lowering this risk will really help pollinators. And risk is that likelihood that there would be adverse effects to bees from a pesticide treatment. And so we teach people that risk is toxicity times exposure. So even if something is very, very toxic to bees, if you're lowering that exposure, you're overall lowering that risk. So one of the big rules, of course, is don't apply certain pesticides during bloom. But of course, keeping in mind the other exposure routes that I was mentioning, like contaminated groundwater, or if you have certain things in the soil and maybe a bee comes and collects that soil for their nest, they're getting that residue into their hive or into their hive nest space. Providing nesting habitat is the second one. So like I had already alluded to, if you have these areas of undisturbed soil, that will really help your ground nesting bees. For cavity nesting bees, you can do several things. You could either, like I mentioned, leave like fallen branches and things like that in your yard space, so these bees will naturally find whatever they need. Or you can keep bee hotels, or leave hollow reeds for bees. But if you're doing something like that, then it becomes an area where you're kind of making an aggregate population of a lot of bees in one space, and that becomes something that you need to manage. So if you have these artificial habitats, and a lot of these are made of bamboo and they're really hard to clean because they're glued, but a lot of these are found in a lot of garden stores. And unfortunately, I don't recommend these because they're hard to clean. Like I said, if you're creating a habitat where a lot of solitary bees are nesting in close congregation with one another, you're now creating kind of a big welcome sign to a lot of these pests and pathogens that solitary bees deal with that they normally would have maybe less of a chance to find if they were more scattered like they naturally nest. So if you're keeping bee hotels, they do need to be managed. So I recommend nests like this. So all of these layers come apart. Each of these holes, the cavity nesting bee, a lot of the time mason bees and leafcutter bees like these bee hotels. And they'll lay a nest, and you can unfold that unfold that layer and clean the nest out. So mason bees, I've kind of alluded to already, they collect mud for their cavity. A lot of the cavity nesting bees kind of have the same style of nesting where they create partitioned little sections for each of their offspring, but not all solitary bees use mud. This is pretty specific to mason bees, but they will collect mud and pack it really tight and make a little division, and then they'll collect a lot of pollen, leave behind the pollen in like we call it a pollen loaf. They lay an egg, which then develops into a larva, and eventually a pupa and an adult. But they'll lay a lot of eggs around the same time because they're only active for a couple of months. And so within the straw or some type of linear cavity, you'll have a bunch of these partitioned little nests that have one offspring per spot in the cavity. And then they like I was saying, they pupate inside cocoons. So these cocoons are very hydrophobic, which means they're protected from water. And so one of the big things that not a lot of people know about mason bee care is that you can clean these cocoons with bleach water, a very mild bleach water, to get off a lot of there's pests or pathogens on outside of the cocoon that you can then clean off, so that bee has a better chance of having better fitness when it emerges. And so this is just a nice picture of a bee starting to chew its way out of the cocoon the next year once it's an adult and ready to emerge. So I do a lot of outreach about best practices for mason bee management. This is something I can probably give a whole talk about, especially because it might be a new process for some of you. But for brevity, I'll just kind of go through it. And then if you would like to ask questions, you can, or I can come back and give a more detailed talk about this. But in spring, adults are active, they emerge, they mate, they're provisioning for that mud and pollen. So the best thing that you can do is provide fresh nest for them. And then if you have cocoons, you can put them near that nest block, and then they'll emerge and likely use that nest again, or that nest space again. And then also planting shrubs or flowers that are actively blooming in early spring are the best ways to support them. If you don't have overwintered cocoons, you can buy cocoons. So there's several mason bee producers like crown bees or rent mason bees that sell cocoons. In the summer, the adults are no longer active. and the offspring are now starting to eat their pollen provision and develop in their nest block. Something that you can do during summer is limiting predator access. So in the summer, they deal with predatory parasitic wasps that like going into their nest block and laying eggs inside the nest area or even in the cocoon. And those wasps' offspring will emerge instead. So storing these blocks away from your yard space, like putting them in a cool garage or shed, or putting like mesh kind of tutu material around will help kind of minimize those wasps from being able to get in. In the fall, the mason bee adults are fully developed inside the cocoon, so they overwinter as adults. Not all solitary bees do that. They're very specific to certain groups, but for mason bees, they overwinter as adults inside their cocoon. And as I mentioned, they're hydrophobic, so they're protected from water. And so you can remove those cocoons from the nest block and you can soak those cocoons in a very mild bleach solution, like 0.05% bleach, and sterilize the nest blocks themselves too. And then as you're looking at the cocoons, you don't want to soak the cocoons longer than like 10 minutes. So you just kind of do it like kind of quick, let them soak there. You can use like, if you have cats, you can have like a litter scoop or a strainer spoon. You can take those cocoons out of that dirty water. And then you can hold them up to light and you can kind of see what's inside. And if there's a lot of empty space, those bees likely are dead or it's a pest or something that shouldn't be there. So you can discard any unhealthy cocoons. And that's a really good way to help maximize the fitness of what generation is going to be emerging in the spring, because you're getting rid of, through this process, you're getting rid of a lot of these pests or pathogens on the outside of the cocoons, and you're throwing away any of the developing pests as well. Over the winter, you can keep the cocoons in your fridge. You can have them in a ventilated container. The only thing that you would do here is just checking for mold or rewashing them if you find that there's a lot of mold growth accidentally. They're pretty hardy cocoons. So if you want a copy of this handout, let me know. I'm happy to send it to you. Some of the predators and pathogens that I'm alluding to are listed here with some pictures. So pollen mites are really super small mites. You can see here on the bee thorax, there's tons of mites here. They are looking for the pollen that's left behind for that bee. So these pollen mites inadvertently starve developing bees because they're consuming what should be left behind for this bee. And so pollen mites can become a major issue, especially if you're not cleaning the nest themselves, because these pollen mite populations can just get bigger and bigger. And as in this picture, you can see this bee's actually on a flower, but is probably going to die because it's just carrying the weight of these pollen mites and having trouble flying. But these pollen mites can now spread to other bees that are landing on this flower. So pollen mites are something that we want to minimize. Chalk brood, I'm sure you've heard of chalk brood with honeybees, but one of the big differences with chalk brood with solitary bees is they don't have that communal defense for social immunity. So chalk brood is actually a fatal disease for solitary bees in a larger way than of course it's fatal to honeybees too, but not in a way that it would dismantle a colony. So of course, chalk brood is a fungal pathogen that the bee larva would be accidentally ingesting, whether it's on the pollen left behind for it or on the nest. It's the nest block itself. It might have these spores and the larva dry out and die. Houdini fly are a spring pest. These are actually newly introduced and a very big issue for mason beekeepers. These flies are more active in the spring when the adults are active. So as the adults are actively laying eggs, these Houdini flies are finding their way into the nest and laying a bunch of their own offspring instead, which will kill the developing bee larva and consume all of the pollen left behind. And then you have these chalcid wasps. So these are the predatory wasps that I was talking about. They have a very long egg-laying mechanism and ovipositor, so they'll pierce right through the cocoon and lay eggs. So these ones are more of a summer pest and something that you can help control by taking down that nest in the summer. So as I mentioned, Houdini flies are newly introduced. They've been in the US for a few years. And you can help report sightings. So if you are a mason beekeeper and you see these tiny flies around your nest, you can do this survey here, or you can find it on this website called rentmasonbees.com/Houdini hunt. And this is a collaboration between this company and a student in UC Riverside. And she is, that student, Abigail, is researching how the mason bees that we have here in the US, specifically blue orchard mason bees, interact with Houdini fly invasion, and hopefully finding ways to help mason beekeepers mitigate the damage that Houdini flies cause. And helping report these sightings would help her understand where they're distributed already. So if you're interested more in bee hotel management practices, I collaborated with one of the workers with Rent Mason Bees to make a video on pretty much everything I'm saying here, but even more detail. It's on our YouTube channel. So here's a QR code, or you can just look up at WSUB program on our YouTube channel. And this will give you also a good idea of where to find resources for how to clean your nest blocks and things like that I didn't go through today. Or like I said, I can definitely come back and talk to you about it if you have people in your club that are interested in that. I also wanted to mention leafcutter bees. Leafcutter bees are often another bee that utilizes bee hotels very readily. Their bee hotel blocks have a little bit smaller diameter holes. Leafcutter bees are quite smaller than mason bees, and they have the similar behavior of making partitioned areas in their cavity, but they use leaf cuttings and petals instead of mud to line their nests. So here's some cool pictures of them. And another difference between them and mason bees is that they don't overwinter as adults. They overwinter in this pre-pupa stage. And leafcutter bees are more active in the summer. So when temperatures reach about 72 Fahrenheit pretty consistently, they'll continue their development from this pre-pupa stage and then become ready to emerge as adults. So that's another difference there between the two groups of bees. But they're pretty cool looking bees. They have very interesting eyes. So I like including this picture here so you can see that. But they deal with their own set of pest pathogens and predator pressure. This is a leafcutter bee nest that I had that I just looked at the back of. So this is the back of the nest. And a lot of these wasps were inside of this area. So you can see the big egg-laying mechanism, this ovipositor. And inside the cocoon, there was no developing bee, just a ton of wasp offspring. So they deal with a lot of the same pressures as well. So whether or not you're managing a mason bee hotel or a leafcutter bee total, a lot of the end of the day, you need to manage those bee hotels. The other thing that you can do to help pollinators is, of course, providing resources. So providing floral resources is helpful. Diversity is always better. I don't know if Priya Chakrabarti Basu has talked with this club yet, but she's our assistant professor in pollinator health and apiculture, and she does a lot of nutrition stuff. And a lot of what her big takeaways is diversity is very important so bees can get adequate nutrients that they need. So you can plant a variety of different colored and shaped flowers. And in your ecosystem, in your yard, you'll be able to support these generalists that usually take advantage of everything. So generalists will pollinate a wide variety of flowers, where specialists are more dependent on maybe a certain group of flowers. You can also think of abundance. So, of course, all of you are more controlled by what space you have. So I, for example, live in an apartment. I don't have a big yard to plant a bunch of flowers, but having potted wildflowers is something I can contribute. So just think about the space you have, and if you're supporting a lot of pollinators, more is better. Of course, if you have a small patch of flowers, that might support a few nests of solitary bees, but maybe not enough for a social colony. You think about how many thousands of bees are in one honeybee colony, and how many foragers are out and about. Also, seasonal availability is another one. So making floral resources available through the different seasons. So you kind of have constancy to whatever pollinators are active during certain times, they'll be able to find something that they need. So here is just to reiterate, the generalist term is going to a wide variety. They're more common. Honeybees, for example, are generalists. And then you have these specialists that go to one species or even just a group of plants or flowers. I also would note that maybe you're aware of with honeybees, generalist pollinators are still, even though they're going to a wide variety of flowers, they're still very good, efficient pollinators, because usually they display this floral constancy where they tend to have a foraging trip where they visit one single species of flower. So there's still that kind of specialized, or not specialized. I don't know exactly the word, but there's maybe fidelity would be a good word for that. Fidelity with the pollen that is getting put onto other plants. There's good cross-pollination there. One example of a specialist bee is in Washington is the globe mallow bee. So this bee is very dependent on globe mallow flowers. So here's the globe mallow and the globe mallow bee. Super cute. Very, very dependent on the globe mallow. Another resource that you can provide is mud or water. I know that water is a good one. A lot of bees usually go to dirtier water because there's better minerals in there. But if you have a apparatus where you have maybe like a fountain or something, having some movement in the water will help make sure that the water doesn't get too dirty. Or if you have, pesticide drift, for example, it'll eventually dilute more. Mud, of course, for mason bees is really important. And then this is a nice picture here just showing you how butterflies usually lick up. This is called like salt licking, or puddling. They'll drink up the salt from puddles. So they need these minerals just like we do. I'm almost to the end of my presentation here, but I also wanted to give a shout out about nocturnal pollinators. So this is a group that I don't think a lot of people naturally think of when you're thinking of pollinators, but there's a lot of critters that are active at night. And so instead of giving a big talk about nocturnal pollinators specifically, I'm just going to recommend this awesome resource called Working the Night Shift: Pollination After Dark. You can look up that title on YouTube, or here's the direct link. It's kind of uglier to try to type the link though, so you're welcome to take pictures of the slides. But in general, the takeaways from that seminar from someone at the Xerces Society is you can support nocturnal pollinators by planting night blooming flowers, or what I thought was interesting was shading your windows. If you have artificial lighting going through your windows, that could be disorienting to pollinators outside. So having little or no artificial lighting in your yard spaces. Also shifting your yard lights to more yellow lights. Yellow is less attractive to pollinators versus like the bright blue, like LED lights. And of course, just making your garden space less tidy, leaving the leaves, like I was mentioning, is that big catchphrase and campaign that Xerces Society is really pushing right now as it comes to fall. Having that plant debris and overgrowth really support other organisms, and you're creating a refuge for pollinators or other insects in your yard space. So the citizen science stuff that Peter was mentioning in my introduction is what I'm going to start talking about now. So has anyone heard of the Washington Bee Atlas, or maybe haven't heard? The Washington Bee Atlas is it's a program that's, I think, in its third year now. And it's a statewide effort put on by the WSDA, Washington State Department of Agriculture, that is essentially surveying for what bees are in Washington. And this is not only helping us just understand what bees are out there, but it's being able to be a very data-driven reason why we maybe need more conservation efforts, or also just helping us catalog what bees are actually extinct or not, or discovering new species. So this program is getting larger and larger, and they're always looking for volunteers. And I believe I have her email up here once more, but if not, Karen Wright, the pollinator taxonomist, is the person you should contact if you're interested in participating. So essentially, you learn how to collect specimens, you learn how to properly label and curate them. You map locations. They use iNaturalist to document what plants the bee is associated with during that collection. You learn how to identify bees. So if you're interested at all in taxonomy, or if this is calling to you, this is definitely a really cool program to be a part of. So like I mentioned, these are the things you learn to do. Curation is something I mentioned, and that's basically pin and labeling bees, which is a really important thing, because when you think about hundreds of years from now, if we have specimens that we've collected, if they're very nicely pinned and labeled, you can get a lot of information from those. As I was working in our museum at Oregon State University, there was bees collected from the early 1900s that you can that are in really good shape, that you can glean some information from. So it's very cool. You can learn to identify bees, and of course, all the supplies are provided to you. So you basically just sign up to go on these trips, and you get to know more people in your area and collect bees. The program that the Washington Bee Atlas folks go through is the Master Melitologist program. So separately from the Washington Bee Atlas, if you're like, I don't really want to be a part of that, but I just kind of want to learn how to like identify bees, you could also just go straight to this Master Melitologist program. It's through Oregon State University Extension, and they go through basically everything I was just mentioning, and that training is built into you signing up as a Washington State Bee Atlas volunteer. So here's the direct link to that program if you'd like to learn more. And so I thought this would be cool to share. This was a news article that came out kind of recently. The Washington Bee Atlas found 25 new or rare species just in its first year. So in 2024, 67 volunteers collected over 17,000 specimens from more than 600 different host plants. And so this is the nice list here of the different species. So if you want to read more about that, you're welcome to go to this link as well. So you can be part of this the citizen science that is very, very impactful and important. Some more resources that are recommended, of course, are Xerces Society. That was the company that the person with that Pollinators After Dark webinar was working with. Audubon Society. The Pollinator Partnership website has a ton of resources, including planting guides. Whoops. The Native Plant Society, and some other associations, including the Butterfly Association and Native Bee Society, and of course the Washington State Beekeepers Association, which you're all familiar with. So I'm going to stop here and take any questions. I just want to say we have a really awesome website that I manage. We also have that website in Spanish. So if you have any Spanish speaking beekeepers that you know, please spread the word that this website's out there. It's a new site that we launched last year. And then we have social media too. So I'm always trying to get more people to follow us so you can get information from me directly through that or through email. So I can take any questions now. And I can stop sharing my screen, I think. If you have a certain question about a slide, let me know and I can put it back up.
Thank you so much, Bree. Really appreciate that. Super interesting. I will go ahead and kick us off with one question I had, and then we'll throw it out to the room and to the people online. So if we go back to bee hotels, you don't need to switch slides, right? But bee hotel question for the leaf cutter bees specific. I think if I understood correctly, you said that they do not make a cocoon until much later in the year, if they do at all. Is that, I assume that's one where you would not harvest the bees then to clean them until after the bees have emerged maybe? Or when would you do the cleaning of that? Is there a way to clean them out to prevent, the pest buildup prior, like the wasps and stuff like that, prior to the actual emergence of bees?
That's a great question. Yes, they might have like something adjacent to a cocoon, but it's not a hydrophobic cocoon like mason bees. So you wouldn't want to soak leafcutter bee nest contents in bleach. So what you would want to do instead is still remove them from the nest itself. You can dislodge a lot of the pollen mites that might be on the outside of the leafcutter bee nest contents. And you could clean the nest block itself. So that's one way to help. It's a little bit less cut and dry. You don't get as much visual ability to look inside the leaf chambers, for example. Like you can't hold it up to light and see that it's empty or malformed like you could with mason bee cocoons. So it's a little bit harder to manage leaf cutters. But yeah, cleaning the nests themselves and removing them from the nest anytime in the fall is still fine. Even though they're not fully developed, you can remove them in the fall.
Were you saying that you would leave them in the leaf chambers though?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you can use like the cap of a pen and just kind of scrape, and they'll dislodge pretty easily from the nest canal.
Thank you so much. I did see a hand raised in the room, Polly.
On the map, where you showed the designation of the various bee populations in the state of Washington, did that include managed bees?
Were you able to hear the question, Bree?
Is it the map that I was like, this is with and without honeybees and bumblebees? Is that the map you were talking about?
Yeah, the map showed the different varieties of bees across the state of Washington as dots.
Okay, that might have included some managed bees. Those maps were based on museum specimens. So those museum specimens could have been collected from various things like traps or people going out with nets. So they were pinned specimens that were just there. So they could have been managed or wild. I'm uncertain of which ones. The paper didn't decipher which honeybees were near beekeeper colonies or anything like that. It was just what's out there based on museum specimens.
Another question in the room?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you again about the cleaning up leaves. What if they just, I mean, I know there's all kinds of insects that use leaves for protection and. You just throw them in a natural area or something like that, I mean, to leave some. So they're not trapped in the house and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's right. I think other talks I've given, I've just said leave them where they're at, and then you get the challenge of, oh well, if I do that, it'll kill all my grass underneath, or maybe it'll, you know, attract something else. But yeah, if you just rake them up and you put them in some area, even if you don't want them in your yard, just instead of putting them in a plastic bag, you'll be able to support your ecosystems better in your yard or around your yard.
Yes, I got a question. Do varroa mites impact any of the native pollinators?
Varroa don't, but I will say that there's a lot of evidence of virus spillover, um, including chalk brood from honeybees to other pollinators. But Varroa, I think, is honeybee specific.
Any questions?
Do we see any, doing the honeybees, they're collected these days, they're wild populations?
Say that one more time.
Are there any wild populations of introduced honeybees in Western Washington?
Are there any wild populations of honeybees?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. It's honestly really hard to tell because you have swarms and there's so many beekeepers. Um, I've always thought that the climate here is a little too rough for or too cold, especially in Western Washington for feral honeybees, but I'm not sure about that to confidently answer.
Any questions from anyone online? In person is.
I have an online question. I get a lot of requests. People have mason bees will get in like their sills and doors and stuff, and they want to know what to do if there's people that would come out and collect those cocoons. Do you know of any resources like that in the area?
There are some contacts that I have that are more they more advertise wasp and bumblebee removals, not so much mason bee. But those companies are like they don't want to use pesticides, like they'll try to physically remove something instead of and like relocate it instead of killing it. I would say if people are having issues with their mason bees, um I could probably try to put them in touch, but mason bees don't actively make, sorry, my dog is in the background. Mason bees don't actively make holes or anything. They'll just use what's already there. So I also would question if that person has an issue with mason bees or if it's like a carpenter bee problem or something else. So yeah, if you want to email me, I can try to help connect that person.
Yeah, I don't have any at the moment, but I get calls every summer about someone with some old house that hasn't been painted in ages, and it's got thousands of mason bees coming and going everywhere in their yard and their walls and everything. And so, yeah, it comes up fairly often, which is unfortunate because they have the perfect habitat, right? But yeah, thank you.
No problem.
I can speak a little bit to that. I used to run one of the bee removal businesses you referenced. And by putting out a mason bee hotel, you're getting them the ideal home. So you'll be able to relocate many of the ones from behind the sill into the home. The other thing I've seen is carpenter bee traps are also very effective for trapping mason bees because they want to crawl in and inspect the hole and they end up in a jar, which I didn't do, but I saw that they, so that the bees do die, within the day of crawling.
That's good to know. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Any final questions for Bree? Okay. Great, thank you so much for making the time to be here. We greatly appreciate it, and you, as well as for all of your work with the Washington, the new Master Beekeepers program, all of that stuff. I guess, do you want to give any kind of, before we close, last thing, do you want to give any kind of pitch for the Master Beekeepers program before you go?
Sure. Yeah. So the Master
Oh,
Beekeeper
okay.
program is it was launched officially, I think, like June 2024. And we've had a couple of sessions so far. It's a self-paced program. So we run it on a website called Extension Foundation. So it's an online course where you listen to talks from various people, including many people from WSU on different topics. I structured it to be sort of like a traditional online college course where you have quizzes and multiple choice exam. You have a discussion prompt to answer about the various topics that are in the modules. And then there's a field component where you have your service points, of course, through WASBA, and you have a final oral exam where you give a talk or design some type of like small workshop with at least an audience of at least 5 people to practice public speaking, because a lot of what master beekeepers end up doing is mentoring others. So being able to speak in small groups is something that is WASBA was really wanting to push in their curriculum. So that's basically the structure of the certification. After you pass the online exam, you have a couple of months to that it's open. You have 3 months to finish the online content. You have 2 years to complete all of your service points. If you're already done with your journeyman or you're working on your journeyman and you have any overflow of service points, those ones that are overflow do count towards your masters. So you don't have to worry about like them accumulating when you start your master's work. They can count from whatever's left from your excess from your journeyman. And the only other thing I'll add now is now that Priya Chakrabarti Basu is in her position as assistant professor, she is actually written into like the pollinator task force WSDA like statewide legislature to be doing the master beekeeper stuff. So she's going to be the one who's teaching it / being the person online because it's a self-paced course for questions. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any other questions about it.
Thank you so much. Okay. Finally, as I said, thank you so much. Wonderful to have you here, and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Closer.